I've really been enjoying exploring the Bahamas in my McGregor 26M dog years. On this trip, I visited 3 keys in the Abacos, the most northern part of the chain of more than 700 islands which make up the Bahamas. In total, I spent 10 days and traveled almost 250 nautical miles on the trip from Freeport to Green Turtle Cay and back. It turned out to be more of an adventure than I had anticipated. I hope you enjoy the trip. The journey began by cruising 10 miles along the southern coast of Grand Bahama to make my way to the southern entrance of the Lucayan waterway. The first night I anchored at Top Gallant Basin, close to the entranceway, and the next morning I explored a sunken sailboat before dropping the mast so I could navigate the waterway. There are 2 bridges that you have to pass under to navigate the 8-mile-long Lucayan waterway, which is why you need to lower the mast. Luckily, something that's relatively easy with the McGregor. One of my friends from work, Mark Hardy, met me at the second bridge, where I took a little break before I re-raised the mast. Then I began motoring the narrow northern section to Dover Sound, where I anchored for the night. Mr. Wilson could barely control his excitement. The trip north from Dover Sound crosses over the Little Bahama Bank, which is a shallow sea which surrounds the northern side of Grand Bahama and most of the Abacos. The depth rarely exceeds more than 10 or 12 feet, which creates the vivid blue-green water which typifies the area. After cruising for a little over 40 miles, I arrived at Great Sail Key, where I anchored for the night. The island is uninhabited, but has a rugged, tropical beauty. And, as the name implies, it's a real bargain with a price tag of only $10 million. The following day, I started making my way to Spanish Cay, which is also about a 45-mile stretch. Thunderstorms were popping up all around me, but luckily I avoided any serious storms. Spanish Cay is relatively small, so it's an easy walk to the tranquil, deserted beaches. Although Spanish Cay is a private island, it has a nice 80-slip marina that's open to the public. Since I visited during the hurricane season, it was basically empty except for the sharks which seemed attracted to my boat. Only a few people live there full time, and it only has 1 restaurant at the marina, but it has great food, and it made me and Wilson feel like we were among friends. I wanted to visit at least 1 more Abaco Cay on the trip, so after a couple of days of reading by the pool and exploring the coast, I paid the bill and started preparing to head south. The 20-mile stretch from Spanish Cay to Green Turtle Cay cruises through one of the premier boating areas in the Bahamas, the Abaco Sea. You pass by several uninhabited islands, and most have anchorages in case you want to drop the hook and play on the snow-white beaches. This was the most beautiful cruising I've ever done. After dodging a few squalls, I arrived at Green Turtle Cay after about 5 hours of cruising from Spanish Cay. I checked into Green Turtle Marina, which is a little pricey, but they do have nice facilities and a tasty restaurant. Of course, like most of the marinas I've visited, they've got plenty of sharks. I rented a golf cart and spent the next several days exploring the island with my trusty half-mate, Mr. Wilson. Green Turtle has a lot of nice little rental cottages, and like nearly everywhere in the Bahamas, miles of spectacular beaches. One of the most unique things about Green Turtle Cay is the little village of New Plymouth, which was founded by British loyalists after the Revolutionary War. It has some quaint houses and buildings, and the locals are friendly and helpful, typical of most Bahamians. Although they are still recovering from the massive destruction of Hurricane Dorian, the island is starting to bounce back. There's a semi-spooky sculpture garden that features busts of some of the founding members of New Plymouth. Green Turtle has an active ferry service that provides transportation to nearby keys, including the main island of Great Abaco. There's plenty of good places to eat in the village, but my favorite spot was the Pineapple Bar and Grill. It's a great spot to have a few gombe punches and lounge in the pool for a few hours. On the way back to the marina, I bought a few lobster tails from one of the youthful divers that supplies the local restaurants. They were so delicious that I ate all three before I could get a picture. Just before I departed the island, I finally spotted one of the turtles, which gives the key its name. After 5 days of enjoying Green Turtle, it was time to start making my way back towards Grand Bahama, since there were a few tropical storms starting to form in the Atlantic. Once I got out of the harbor, I put the jib up and started motor sailing up the Abaco Sea. Typical for the season, there were pop-up storms all throughout the day. A couple hours after I left Green Turtle Cay, I had a squall and I had difficulty furling the jib because it got caught in the spinnaker halyard as the sail was flogging. After I resolved that issue and the squall had passed, the waves started to build as I passed out of the Abaco Sea and turned west towards Great Sail Cay. Despite the custom rain cover, water started filling the back half of my nesting dinghy Scaphi. Trouble was brewing. At first I tried pumping the water out, but I was afraid Scaphi was going to capsize because of the waves, so I climbed back into dog ears and hoped I could make it to Great Sail Cay to pump it out there. However, soon after I heard a loud pop and looked back to see that the two halves of Scaphi had broken apart. All 6 plastic T-handles had separated from the metal sleeves that held them to the bolts, and the only thing holding the 2 pieces together was the rain cover that I'd secured to the hull with multiple ropes. I killed the engine and began to attempt to get her aboard while dealing with the waves. I didn't want to lose my beautiful little boat. After almost 2 hours of struggling, I was able to get both parts on deck using the main halyard and cabin top winch. Then, 3 dolphins appeared and started swimming under the bow, and I noticed that I had drifted under the power of the jib into dangerously shallow water, less than 4 feet deep. After the timely alert from Neptune's messengers, I started slowly working my way back on course around the numerous corals under the shallow sea. Eventually, I was back on track, but I was behind schedule and ended up having to anchor in the dark in the now somewhat familiar harbor of Great Sail Cay. After I set the anchor watch in the gusty winds and poured myself a couple of beers, I sat in the cockpit and began to thank the thousands of lucky stars that were beaming overhead. The next day, it was back to smooth sailing as I cruised through the magical blue waters back towards the northern shore of Grand Bahama. I was very happy to have Scaphi on the bow, but she had taken a beating and added some scratches to dog ears in the struggle to get her aboard. No one was more relieved to have Scaphi back than Mr. Wilson. Once I arrived back to Dover Sound, I dropped the mast and began motoring the waterway back to the southern shore. After re-raising the mast, I finally put the sails up, turned off the engine, and started sailing back to my home base at Xanadu Beach. It had been a challenging trip, but I learned several valuable lessons, the most important being to never tow the dinghy more than a few miles, and definitely not in adverse conditions. sail back on a moonlit ocean was a great ending to a memorable trip. I hope you can join me on my next adventure, where I plan to cruise to Grand Cay at the northern tip of the Abacos, which is supposed to have some exceptional fishing and snorkeling. Until then, check out the video about my previous trip to the Barrier Islands called Buried Treasure on my YouTube channel. As always, stay safe out there.